right, so we're back for another deep dive, and this time we're heading straight back into the crazy world of Philippine politics.
Buckle up.
Yeah, it has been a wild couple of months, hasn't it, since those initial accusations against Vice President Sara Duterte came out.
It has.
And now, even after the House voted to impeach her, she's refusing to resign.
She is digging in her heels.
It's a pretty bold move, especially considering everything she's been accused of.
Yeah, you've got everything from corruption to plotting against the president. I mean, it's not every day you see this level of defiance when someone's facing impeachment.
Absolutely not.
Oh.
So for anyone just tuning in and trying to catch up, let's just quickly recap the whole timeline.
Yeah.
So we had those initial allegations back in December of 2023. Then that growing rift between Duterte and President Marcos Jr. started becoming pretty public.
Right.
Then there were those massive protests in January demanding her resignation. And then finally that House vote to impeach on February 5th. It's been nonstop.
It's been a whirlwind. And you know what makes this whole situation even more interesting is that this impeachment isn't just about the legal process. You know, it's a political battle playing out for the whole country to see.
On a national stage.
Yeah. And you have to remember, Duterte and Marcos Jr. were elected together on the same ticket?
A joint ticket.
Yeah, they were supposed to be allies working together.
Working to bring stability and progress to the Philippines.
Exactly.
So this isn't just some typical political disagreement.
No.
This is a full-blown power struggle.
Between two people who were supposed to be on the same side?
Exactly. What do you think about Duterte's decision to not resign? Is it just pure defiance? Is it some kind of calculated political strategy? Or is it maybe a bit of both?
I think it's probably a mix, to be honest. On one hand, you kind of have to admire her tenacity.
Yeah.
She's facing some incredibly serious accusations, and she's not budging. There's definitely an element of, I'm going to fight this to the very end.
And that seems to be working with at least some of her supporters. They see her as a fighter. Someone who's not going to be pushed around by the political establishment.
Right, and that's where the political strategy comes in by refusing to resign. Duterte is controlling how this whole thing is seen.
The narrative.
Yeah, she can frame this impeachment as a way to hurt her reputation and derail her goals.
And let's not forget about those goals because she's made it pretty clear that she wants to run for president in 2028.
Right, she's got her eyes on that prize.
And this whole impeachment thing could actually help her chances.
It could.
If she can get through this and come out on top,
She could look even stronger.
an independent leader who can survive anything.
It's a risky move, but the payoff could be huge.
So let's actually get into those accusations because they're pretty serious.
Oh yeah, this is not just some minor policy disagreement.
Not at all.
There are 7 articles of impeachment, and some of them are really explosive. I think the ones that have everyone talking are those allegations that she plotted to kill. President Marcos Jr. misused confidential funds, has all this unexplained wealth, and was trying to destabilize the government.
Wow, a death threat against the president? That's intense. It is. What do you think are the chances that these accusations will actually stick?
Well, that's what this upcoming Senate trial will decide. It's important to remember that impeachment isn't just about the law.
Right.
It's about politics, too. They'll present evidence, call witnesses, and ultimately, the senators will decide what happens to Duterte.
This trial is going to be huge.
It is.
The whole country is going to be watching.
Every news outlet is going to be dissecting every single detail, every piece of evidence, every statement from both sides.
And public opinion is going to be a major factor here, too.
Right? Definitely how Filipinos view the evidence and how Duterte defends herself is going to influence what the senators decide. We've already seen protests for and against her. It just shows how deeply divided people are over this whole case.
So we've got a vice president who's refusing to step down, even though she's facing career-ending accusations.
Yeah.
And a country that's on edge watching it all unfold.
It's got all the makings of a great story power, betrayal, intrigue.
It does.
And it's not over yet. The Senate trial is just the next chapter in what's probably going to be a long and complicated story.
Before we get into the details of those impeachment charges and what might happen in the Senate trial, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture. What does all of this tell us about the state of Philippine democracy?
Okay.
Is this a sign of strength, that the system is holding powerful people accountable? Or is it a sign of weakness that these deep divisions and personal feuds are threatening the stability of the whole country?
That's a good question, and honestly, I think it's a bit of both.
Okay.
On the one hand, you could argue that the fact that a vice president can be impeached and put on trial shows that their democracy is working.
It shows that no one is above the law.
Right. There's a system in place to deal with these kinds of accusations, no matter how important the person is.
But you can't ignore how divisive this whole thing has been.
No.
It's making people on both sides really angry.
And there's a real worry that this could make people trust the government even less.
And then there's the Duterte factor.
Right.
We can't forget that Sara Duterte is Rodrigo Duterte's daughter.
A former president known for doing things his own way.
And for his strongman tactics.
His legacy is hanging over this whole situation.
So this isn't just about Sara Duterte, it's about the entire Duterte family and their influence on Philippine politics.
It is.
It's about this legacy of populism and strongman rule, and the challenges of making democracy work in the Philippines.
It's about that struggle between those who want a more transparent government and those who feel like that's a threat to them.
It's fascinating and complex, and we're really just getting started.
Yeah, we've got a lot more to unpack.
And let's talk about power, because at the center of this whole drama are those impeachment charges.
Absolutely.
We have 7 articles, some more explosive than others. Where should we even begin?
I think the ones that have really grabbed everyone's attention and sparked the most debate are the allegations of plotting to kill President Marcos Jr.,
Yeah.
misuse of those confidential funds,
Right.
unexplained wealth,
Unexplained wealth,
and actions aimed at destabilizing the government.
an assassination plot against the president. That's not something you hear every day. Is there even any solid evidence to back that up?
That's one of the big questions hanging over this whole thing.
Yeah.
The specifics haven't really been made public yet, but the impeachment complaint says that Duterte made a threat against the president's life back in November 2024.
Wow.
So how that threat was made,
Yeah.
was it actually credible? All of that is going to be crucial to how this charge plays out.
It's hard to imagine how she could ever recover from that politically if it turns out to be true.
It would be devastating. It could even lead to criminal charges.
Wow.
But we have to remember, it's just an allegation at this point.
Right.
We have to wait and see what the evidence shows during that Senate trial.
Okay, so let's move on to those other charges. What about the misuse of funds and the unexplained wealth? That sounds like the typical corruption you see in these kinds of scandals.
It does, and it really taps into this frustration that a lot of people in the Philippines feel.
Yeah.
Corruption's been a problem there for a long time.
It has.
And these charges basically allege that Duterte used her position to make herself and her allies richer
Right.
while taking money that was supposed to be for public services.
So what kind of evidence are we talking about? Are there any financial records, whistleblowers, anything concrete?
Again, the specifics are still kind of unclear, but we'll probably learn more during the trial. But the impeachment complaint points to some suspicious financial transactions,
Right.
spending that doesn't really match up with her official income, and possible conflicts of interest with companies connected to her family.
It's a lot to deal with. Her legal team is going to be busy trying to disprove all of that.
They are. They'll probably argue that it's all political,
Right.
that the evidence isn't strong enough, and that her wealth comes from legitimate business, not corruption.
And then there's that charge of trying to destabilize the government.
Right.
That one's a bit more vague. What does that even mean?
That one's interesting because it goes right to the heart of this power struggle.
Between Duterte and President Marcos Jr.
Exactly. The complaint says that Duterte has been actively trying to undermine the president's authority, causing trouble within the ruling coalition, and maybe even supporting opposition groups.
So it's not so much about specific things she did, but more about a pattern of behavior meant to weaken the president.
Right, basically trying to create instability and distrust,
Right.
which they say ultimately helps Duterte and her political goals.
It sounds like this trial is going to be about who can tell their side of the story better.
It is. Duterte will try to say she's the victim of some kind of political attack, while her opponents will say she's a danger to democracy and the rule of law.
Exactly. A classic power struggle with really high stakes.
For everyone involved, not just Duterte in her career, but for the entire Philippines. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer will have consequences that go far beyond this one case.
Absolutely.
It will shape how Filipinos view their democracy and whether it can actually hold powerful people accountable.
So we've got a vice president who's refusing to back down,
Right.
serious accusations,
A nation on edge.
and a Senate trial
Mhm.
that could make or break their democracy.
And let's not forget about the Duterte factor.
Yeah.
Sara Duterte carries the legacy of her father, Rodrigo Duterte.
A polarizing figure.
His influence is all over this, adding another layer of complexity to an already messy story.
It's like watching a Shakespearean play unfold in real time.
I know, right?
Ambition, betrayal, a fight for power that could change the future of the Philippines.
Absolutely. We've gone over the accusations against Vice President Sara Duterte, the evidence, the upcoming Senate trial.
Right.
Now let's put on our analyst hats and explore what could happen and what those outcomes could mean.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's start with the scenario that would really shock the Philippines, a conviction by the Senate.
Right. A guilty verdict.
And just a reminder, it takes a 2/3 majority vote to remove Duterte from office.
That's right.
That would be huge. It would be the first time a Philippine vice president has ever been removed through impeachment.
Unprecedented.
What kind of fallout are we talking about here?
Well, it would be a massive win for Duterte's opponents.
For sure.
And it could really shift the balance of power. It would encourage those pushing for more accountability and transparency.
Right.
And it might even weaken the grip of these political dynasties like the Duterte. But wouldn't that also risk dividing the country even more?
It could.
Her supporters are already saying this whole thing is a witch hunt.
Right.
Conviction would just make them angrier, wouldn't it?
It's definitely a concern. It could be seen as the establishment silencing a popular leader, which could lead to protests and unrest.
Protests, yeah.
It's a tricky situation. They need to uphold the law, but also avoid creating more division.
And we have to consider what this would mean for the 2028 presidential election.
Right.
Conviction would probably mean she can't run.
Right.
Yeah.
Most likely. Yeah, it would really shake things up politically.
Yeah.
It would open the door for new candidates and maybe even change alliances within the parties.
Okay, so that's conviction. Now, let's look at the other side. What if the Senate acquits her?
What if she's found not guilty?
Yeah, what would happen then?
Well, that would be a huge victory for her. She could come out of this looking even stronger.
Right.
She could say that she was the victim of a political attack and survived.
Talk about a comeback story.
I know, right? It would solidify her image as a fighter, someone who doesn't back down.
Someone who can overcome anything.
Exactly. And it could really energize her supporters and set her up perfectly for a 2028 run.
Imagine the campaign slogan, "They tried to take me down, but I'm still here."
Exactly.
Wouldn't that send a dangerous message?
It could.
Like, powerful people can get away with anything, even if they're accused of serious crimes.
It could reinforce that cynicism that a lot of people feel about the government,
Right.
that they can't really tackle corruption or uphold the law.
So you're saying that even though it would be good for Duterte personally, it could actually hurt Philippine democracy in the long run?
It's a possibility it could erode trust in the institutions and make that gap between the elites and everyday Filipinos even wider.
Okay, so we've talked about conviction and acquittal, but what about something in between?
Right.
Like something that doesn't remove her from office, but still has consequences.
That's where things get really interesting. The Senate could censure her
Okay.
or give her a formal reprimand. Acknowledge that she did something wrong, but not go as far as conviction.
That would still hurt her reputation even if she gets to stay in office.
It wouldn't be a clean slate.
Not at all. It would definitely affect her political future.
Yeah.
And it might even weaken her standing within her own party.
It could. Other politicians might see that as an opportunity to challenge her.
So we've got all these different possibilities.
Right.
And it's really hard to say what's going to happen.
It is.
But one thing's for sure, this impeachment trial is a pivotal moment for the Philippines.
Absolutely. It's a real test for their democracy. Will their institutions hold up?
Right.
Will the rule of law win out, or will political maneuvering and personal vendettas decide what happens?
And it goes way beyond just Sara Duterte and her political career.
Yeah.
This is about the future of the Philippines.
It is.
Its role in the region and what its people want.
Their hopes for a more just and fair society.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this. Pay attention to what happens, the evidence, the arguments, the political maneuvering, because this trial isn't just about one woman's future, it's about the soul of a nation.
It really is.